This movie's not that bad when you don't have someone in your ear telling you that it's nothing like the source material. When you don't have that, it's great. Hi, I'm Bobby. Welcome to Culture Kitsch. Today we are talking about one movie that has a lot of contention within the vampire contingent that I find myself dibbling and dabbling in every once in a while, and that is 2002's Queen of the Damned, starring Stuart Townsend, Marguerite Moreau, and Queen of my heart, Queen of my life, Aaliyah. As you can tell, I'm a really big fan. Queen of the Damned is not streaming anywhere, and I'm not necessarily saying it should be streamed anywhere, but I am saying that it was an atrocity that I had to pay $2.99 to watch it. This is not a movie I should be paying to watch. But one thing I realized about this movie is that this was one of my first forays into vampire culture via film and TV. Like, if I'm going back into my memory log, I think I watched this movie before Interview with a Vampire, if I'm not mistaken. And I watched it because of Aaliyah. I was a huge fan of her, still am to this day, and I watched her whole filmography, which is 2 films, sadly. She was slated before she died to do, I think it was the Matrix movie, and also she was supposed to be Honey. The movie Honey, Jessica Alba, that was supposed to be Aaliyah. This movie is very much so not loved by like tried and true immortal universe like Vampire Chronicles fans. I can't blame them, rightfully so. If you imagine a Venn diagram of people who could potentially like this movie, being vampire fans, fans of Aaliyah, and fans of new metal, in the center of that is me. In the center of that Venn diagram is your girl. Like, this movie was kind of tailor-made for me to semi-enjoy. And having, like, when I first saw the movie, having no idea what any of these characters were from their source material, I had a blast. And I'm not gonna lie to you, in watching it recently for this video, I had a blast again. Because it's ridiculous, but it's also like, you can see the movie that it thinks it is and that it's maybe trying to be, but it doesn't quite get there. But either way, I had fun. Let's just get into it. So this film opens up and we're seeing some like shots of a marble statue of the titular Queen of the Damned. And it's a very, very fitting that the first thing that we see in this film is Akasha, because Aaliyah was the first person cast in this movie. There were other people that they were thinking of getting to play Akasha, including Cher. Cher was in contention to play Akasha, or was it the very least like they took a conversation with her? But ultimately it was Aaliyah who ended up getting the role. And the director, Michael Reimer, says in a Vulture oral history about the movie, he talks about how he went up to Vancouver where Aaliyah was because she was shooting Romeo Must Die. That movie also struggles with what this movie struggles with, which is not enough Aaliyah. Not enough of her, just saying. He goes up to Vancouver and he talks to her and is basically like, hey, you know, I think you'd be a good fit for this, but I just want to, again, I need to know if you're good to go through this process with me before I can kind of say like, hey, like this is the one. So allegedly he takes her through this very extensive audition process, which includes her learning a monologue from Salome by Oscar Wilde, and is it Salome? Salome. And she also goes into very extensive accent and dialect work, learning a lot of Egyptian accents and things like that. And eventually, like, he said that he had her like reciting the monologue in this Egyptian accent, and she was like on the ground, like crawling around like a calf and everything, and that proved to him that she was like willing to go the distance and like was a trooper. Now she never talked about her audition process for the film or anything, so she's obviously not here to be able to confirm that, but that's what he said was a part of her audition process for the film. But either way, she was the first person cast in the film. After we see these kind of like shots of Akasha in her marble statue form, we start to get a voiceover from the vampire Lestat, who's being played by Stuart Townsend, who beat out Heath Ledger to play this role. Yeah. So we basically know that Lestat has been sleeping for a very long time, and he is awakened. He is awakened by the sound of early 2000s, late 90s new metal. And so he goes to it and he finds that this band has been like practicing in his old house, assumingly in New Orleans. And he spooks the band, obviously, because he just shows up, shirt open as hell, his alabaster skin laid out like Ian Malcolm in Jurassic Park, and he's like vocalizing with them, and he's just like, "You're all so beautiful," and they're like, "Thanks," or whatever. And he basically reveals himself to be a vampire within 2 seconds. I'm like, oh, broke the vampire rule immediately. Time to fry, vampire boy. Like, I'm just so no nonsense about these vampire rules. And eventually he just ends up like taking them to be his band, and he's like, my band, my children, something to that effect. And we get into the main credit sequence, and they're playing the song Forsaken, and the music for this film was done by Richard Gibbs and Jonathan Davis of Korn. And funnily enough, the music of this film is what kind of set the tone for the film. Not just like hearing the sound of Forsaken in the beginning, but Richard Gibbs and Jonathan Davis were tasked to make the songs before the movie was even cast. So before they even started shooting, they were creating songs that were essentially going to like set the tone for what this movie was going to be. They are the reason why this movie kind of has this like late 90s, early 2000s grungy new metal kind of like cyber metal vibe to it. It's because of them and their music. This is just a small like film nerd thing, but if you notice the visuals of this music video that's playing in the opening credit sequence, it is themed to this German expressionist film called The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, which is said to be one of the earliest horror films in addition to Nosferatu. The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari came out in 1920, Nosferatu came out in 1922. It is essentially the foundation for what we know the horror movie to be, the vampire horror movie to be, etc., etc., etc. That whole film movement that was out of Germany obviously had a very, very, very big footprint on the horror movie industry. We get into it. Lestat is the vampire Lestat. He's this, great rock star or whatever, and he's doing this press conference and he's talking about how he's planning on playing these big shows, one of which will be in Death Valley, and he is just like, I want to be out and proud of my vampire heritage. And the press are like, oh, like, you're a vampire, like, you really believe that, like, and they're into it, like, they're asking him questions as if he is a real vampire. And it is very reminiscent of the Théâtre des Vampires from the show Interview with the Vampire, where they are like telling the audience, I am a vampire, we are vampires. And the audience is like, oh my God, what a performance this is. Like, they think it's fake, but it's actually real.
Anything else to say to the other vampires listening out there?
As a matter of fact, I do. Come out, wherever you are.
The press conference is over and his manager brings in these girls, and this is like a regular thing for him. This is how he feeds every night. And not to be like a real Lestatinator or anything like that, but the fact that it's 2 girls is crazy because Lestat is rated E for everyone. He is a rated E for everyone bisexual. Like, that man would have had a slice of everybody. Very much a where's everybody from type of guy. That's the one thing that they talked about with this film, is that they kind of ignore Lestat's bisexuality. They don't explore it at all, even. Like, there's no, like, don't watch this movie expecting him to mention Louis or anyone like that. Like, that's not gonna happen. Like, they treat him as this kind of almost standalone character that doesn't really have a backstory. And then we cut to Jessie. Jessie is this woman who works for the Telemasca, who, if you know the show Interview with a Vampire, they're kind of the secret society that track witches, vampires, supernatural creatures in general. And so she works for them in kind of a low-level aide role, and she's presenting her findings, I guess, on the vampire Lestat, who is very out and proud and like a vampire. Lestat is kind of this new guy. Like, he's this new subject to be studied because he's a vampire for the first time in a long time who wants to be seen and found and known to be a vampire. Also, Jessie's little secret is that she's been having this dream since she was 6, apparently, of seeing this assumed to be vampire woman who is just like, you have to go be with your own kind now and everything. And I was like, girl, go to a psychiatrist. What do you mean you had that same dream every night since you were 6? Spooky. Spoiler alert, that's Maharet, and Maharet is a ancient vampire. So Jessie has some connection to the ancient vampires. Put a pin in that. We'll get to it far too late into this movie, but we will get to it. Jessie is presenting her findings to the Talamasca, and she basically tells them like, oh, there's this vampire coven that's still in London. Like, there's a bunch of vampires running up through that joint.
I think that it's a vampire coven, and Lestat is leading us to it.
And the Talamasca are like, you're only supposed to report and surveil. You're not supposed to interfere. And she's like, oh my God, I know. But like, Lestat has very clearly piqued her interest, and so she's like looking into this. Her mentor, I guess, whose name is David, takes her and is just like, hey, listen, I know that you're really into this because I'm really into this. I've been studying this guy named Marius for the longest time, and funnily enough, Marius is Lestat's maker. Wrong. Marius is not Lestat's maker. Magnus is Lestat's maker. This is where you kind of can see the Frankensteining of the vampire Lestat and Queen of the Damned, and really the rest of the like vampire Anne Rice books kind of all being Frankenstein together. If they're kind of being a little bit like ahistorical anyways, like I don't know why they just didn't call him Magnus, but whatever. Basically, David is just like, I have this journal, and it's Lestat's old journal right from when he was turned, essentially. And so we do a cut back to Lestat and Marius, who turns him. So Marius has this is before Lestat is turned. Marius has Lestat. He like shows up to him and he's just like, oh, chill out, everything's cool. And Marius attacks Lestat and starts like draining him. And then after he's done draining him, he's just like, you're weak. You just killed this man. And then you're just like, you're weak. You need me. What? And here's the thing. I'm not going to speak. I just know I'm not speaking from the perspective of this movie as someone who knows anything about what happens in these books. Like, I'm only like 3/4 of the way through Interview with a Vampire. So none of that information helps me in this movie. So I'm not watching this as someone who's like, oh, that's wrong because in the book this happened. I'm like, this is weird just from like a movie standpoint. Having known nothing, just some of the reads and moments in this movie, like this movie is a comedy when it wants to be. Like when it wants to be funny, it's hilarious. Marius is like, I'm gonna turn you. I chose you. I want us to, go through this thing called life for eternity together. When Marius offers Lestat his blood, Lestat is a bit of an overdrinker. That's a Mystery Mouse School tool that will help us later. Just know that. Marius teaches Lestat the ways of the vampire, and in turn, this is the film establishing the rules of the vampire to us, the audience, if you're not keenly aware of it. So Marius basically tells Lestat that like when you drink, you must never drink to the last drop or else death will pull you in with it. Like basically the rule of like not drinking dead blood is carried throughout this film, but it's just presented in a different way. That will also be important later in the film.
Well, so I could never know her?
Not unless you wanted to kill her.
So I could never be known?
and that's going to be a problem for him. After this scene, Lestat is playing again, and all of a sudden his violin bow is thrown almost like a ghost like took it in through it. And so he goes after it and he discovers this hidden chamber. And inside this chamber, what did we see? The marble statues from the very opening of the film that contain Akasha and Inkil, her king.
Would you like me to play for you?
He starts playing for Akasha, and we see all these like weird like cuts and stuff like that, and you know that something is happening. And in that process, Akasha lifts up her arm and like basically offers her blood to Lestat. She's still a marble statue at this point. Lestat, being the glutton that he is, drinks Akasha's blood. And that's a problem because Akasha's blood is the oldest blood. It is the most powerful blood. And so he has to be chained down by Marius. When Marius finds out that Lestat drank from Akasha. Marius tells Lestat like who Akasha is. She's the mother of all vampires. Like, you shouldn't have drank from her. That was a boneheaded thing to do. And so Akasha's blood makes Lestat super strong and super powerful. And Marius is just like, that's a problem. Marius is kind of upset because he's like, I have been tending to them for centuries. Like, this is my house. This is my little secret chamber that I put them in. I have been tending to them and they haven't moved once. But then you show up and play your little song and all of a sudden she's like offering her marble wrist to you. That upsets me a little bit. I don't like it. And Lestat's just like, ha 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 ha. Like, she chose me. She woke up because of my music, not because of you. Boring. And so that kind of sends Marius off. And from that point on, Marius just kind of abandons Lestat for centuries, decades, eons. He leaves him. I think this is the most that we get of the book, The Vampire Lestat. And even then, it's a very like bastardized version of the story. But that's all the information that you need on like what Lestat's deal is at this point. So Jessie, because she is hard-headed, goes to the Vampire Coven Club. She said that she's been there before, but been on the outside, like in order to get a picture of it, but she's never been inside. She goes inside for the first time. Let me tell you something, the vibe in there, a lot of leather, a lot of tight, a lot of longing looks, hazy gazes. That's what this club is. And so Jessie, with her little space buns and fur coat, go in there, and the vampires descend on her immediately. And they're just like, oh, like, you know, where's your keeper? Like, where's your host? And she's like, oh, like, he's around here somewhere. And they're like, who is it? And she's like, Marius, that's my host. Lestat is there, and he's just like sitting in the shadows, and he hears Marius, and he literally like comes out of the shadows to be like, who is talking about my maker, who I've been trying to look for the past 500,000 years. So she gets in way over her head. The Telemasca told her ass not to go to the club because she would be killed. And when she leaves the club, what happens? Those vampires immediately try to kill her. And so then Lestat comes and saves the day. Lestat was just like, you know, like, you mentioned Marius, how do you know Marius, etc., etc., etc. Then we get this scene, which when I watched this movie when I was I won't say a kid, when I was way too young to have been watching this movie, when I saw this scene for the first time, something in my brain broke. You know, something, I think about the person that I might have been had I not seen this movie. Because the way that I grew up, to have this as the expectation of flirting and seduction in my mind, not good vibes. Not good at all. We get this scene, which is unnecessarily hot to me. I don't know why. Jessie's like fumbling through the information that she's read from his journal. And he's just, you know, like, oh, like, who am I? And everything. He takes her hand and presses it against a dull piece of metal, which I know would hurt. Presses her thumb against this like dull piece of metal to puncture it. It draws blood, and then he like sucks her thumb with the blood on it. And it's just the look that he's giving her in that moment where he knows that he has the full and complete upper hand on her. I was like, ooh. Something happened to my spirit in that moment. I was taken over by a Jezebel spirit in that moment. Oh my gosh. Still hot all these years later. all these years later. Lestat hears all the information that Jesse has, which like a regular fan wouldn't. He's just like, like you're a clever librarian, telemaskin. Like that's a slur in this universe. Telemaskin. So then he leaves and Jesse is stood there heaving bosom and all. And then the next day she leaves London to go to LA where Lestat is going to be again. So that one little moment of them interacting, she was like, oh, I'm in it, girl. I am in it. She leaves London, flies across the pond, flies across the United States to get to LA where Lestat is going to be. She got digmatized without getting any dick. That's crazy. That's crazy. So we cut to LA where Lestat is like, I'm at home in LA. LA is full of youth drainers anyway, so I fit right in. I was like, ooh, LA, don't make that face. Don't make that face. And he's listening to music and then he's awoken by a presence, and that presence is Marius, who has returned. Marius comes back and he's just like, hey, Pookie, hope you miss me. It's been a while since we've last chat. And like I said, this movie is a comedy when it wants to be, because Lestat asks Marius,
How did you manage to slip through the 50s in red velvet?
I slept.
when I tell you I scream, that line is just so unnecessarily funny. How did you make it through the 50s in red velvet? That's a read. Like, they're really queening out with each other derogatory. Like, it is so funny. Marius comes back to ask him, like, why are you waking all this stuff up? Like, what's the purpose of all of this? Why are you doing this? And essentially what is, I think, meant to be read there is that Lestat in this movie is kind of acting like a petulant child who's like wanting attention because he's feeling unloved and neglected. I think Marius abandoning him really did a number on him. And so him becoming this global rock star that he is, and like in turn, like turning the world's eye to him and vampires in general is a way to like get the attention on him so that, the people that he wants to care about him, they will care about him. But unfortunately it's courting the wrong attention. Like, he's, I think, incredibly lonely. I think every vampire in this movie is incredibly lonely, Akasha included. And they're all in typical Anne Rice vampire fashion, going the completely wrong way about remedying that loneliness. Like I said, when Marius and Lestat are talking, like I said, they are really quinting out derogatory. Like, they are throwing jabs at each other back and forth. Marius said, like, it wasn't hard to find you. I just had to look for the most gauche house on the block. Lestat, get up off the floor. Get up. Marius and Lestat are having this conversation on a billboard, and they are planted firmly just right in front of Lestat's dick. Just right there. Marius is questioning Lestat, but he has come to Lestat to tell him, hey, your music woke somebody up. Yeah, it woke someone up. So Lestat played for Akasha a couple scenes ago, and that like wakes her up enough so that he can drink her blood and have her blood kind of coursing through him. Him being a part of this band and traveling the world with this band has fully woken up the queen. And then we get the best scene in this movie. We get the best scene in this movie, which is the queen. The queen Akasha. She's up. She's moving. She's beautiful. She's sexy. She's radiant. She's stunning. She's back. We're so back. We're all so back. We should all be happy. What this scene is Akasha going to that vampire club that Jesse almost got her ass beaten at. I should say her ass eaten at. Ayo. She shows up and she sees Lestat on the screen and she says, like, scent is fading. He was here too long ago. Mind you, I know all of her dialogue, but like, she is just like, I can smell him. He was just here. And so the other vampires clearly know what the hell is up. Like, they can feel her ancient presence. Like, they know that the HBIC just walked into the building. And some of them, rightly so, terrified. But others, stupidly, are, like, trying to go at her. And so the same vampire guy who was trying to attack Jesse is trying to get at Akasha. Now, if I came to the conclusion that I would like to draw, I would say misogyny. And my girl, she gets out on that dance floor does her little moves or whatever, like puts the moves on him, lures him in, same vampire guy, gives him a little kiss, and then penetrates his skin and bone, takes his heart out, drinks from it, and then crushes the heart in her hand. Best scene in the movie. If the scene earlier with Lestat and Jesse broke my brain, this one rewired it. This one rewired it in a way that, again, I don't know who I would have been had I not seen this movie when I saw it. I don't know who I would have been. I could have been a rocket scientist for all we know. But I'm this, okay? In my mind. Always. Always. Never will forget it. Best scene of the movie. And it's literally like 2 minutes. Maybe, if that. Akasha has now shown up 50 minutes into the film. And she has a total screen time of like 10. That's what's wrong with this movie. Not enough Akasha. So then Akasha slaughters the whole club. They go to attack her. I don't know why they did that. I don't know what vampire logic is all the time. But if I'm in a vampire club and I see this beautiful woman walk in wearing what she's wearing, she clearly is an ancient because look at what she's wearing. She then punches through a guy's skin and bone, rips out his heart, drinks it, and then crushes it. Why am I then going to think I can take her on? All those vampires in that spot collectively were like, oh, let's all attack her. Excuse me? No, I'm going home. I'm going home. Did you just see what happened? Did you just see his heart come out of his body? And she drank from it and then crushed it. I'm good. She crushed it like a gusher. I'm sorry. I'm not going after her. I'm going home. Essentially, she slaughters the whole place and lights it up. Like literally sets it on fire in her pursuit of trying to find where the hell Lestat is. Best scene of the movie. Best scene of the movie. So now we're at in and around the time of the concert. Jessie is now in LA. She's getting out of the car and I guess showing up to wherever Lestat is, of course. And funnily enough, the guy who was like trying to sell her tickets, like counterfeit tickets, that guy is Jonathan Davis of Korn. In the film, it is Jonathan Davis who is the singing voice for Lestat. But due to a contractual snafu, he is not singing on the soundtrack for the film. Now, essentially, you would think that the songs that appear in the movie were just carried over to the soundtrack, but Jonathan Davis was signed to Sony, and so Sony was not willing to let his voice appear on a Warner Brothers music group soundtrack, and so they basically had to put their heads together and be like, okay, how are we going to do this? And the solution that they came up with was they had a bunch of lead singers from other kind of similar groups who were coming up around the same time. They were all kind of friends, come in and be the singing voice for Lestat. So included in that group, you had Wayne Static of Static X, David Draiman of Disturbed, and Chester Bennington of Linkin Park. So they all provided the singing voice for Lestat on the soundtrack, but in the film, it is Jonathan Davis. Funny little cameo. Jessie becomes one of the girls that Lestat's manager brings to him every single night, essentially to feed on. It's her and this other girl. And this other girl is like very excited to be there. But Lestat is not paying attention to her. He's paying attention to Jessie, who he's like, oh, you've flown across half of the world to come and see me. Like, what is this? And so, like, Lestat and Jessie are clearly having a one-on-one, and the girl keeps trying to interject, and then Lestat just tells his manager, like, I'm gonna only take one for tonight. Before I get into it, Jessie has that shit on. She has an outfit on that I'm like, oh, I will be copying that. What you guys don't know about me is that I am a natural redhead, as we can see, and so I'm always on the hunt for best outfits for us natural redheads. Don't look at my roots. And that outfit I will be taking. Yeah, I will be taking that. She had it on and I was like, wow. Wow. I will be recreating that in this lifetime or the next. Jessie like offers herself to Lestat, like not in that way, but like I guess offers her companionship to him, and he accepts, and so he then takes her up flying through the air and they go to the Griffith Observatory. Now mind you, as soon as they land there, he drops her. Oh, whoa. bad first date if your date flings you up into the air and then drops you. I'm sorry, you're not getting a second date after that. But literally when I was watching it, I was like, they're at Griffith's Observatory. Okay, La La Land. All right, City of Stars. Like, whoa. Lestat basically, like, he and Jesse have a conversation, and she's like, you know, that's what I like about you. What I like about you is your humanity and your frailty and everything. And I was like, who is this? Because this is not Lestat. Lestat likes someone because they're human, and it's not because they are a meal for him. Girl, anyways, like, I'm sure in the books maybe they expound upon, you know, Lestat's relationship with humanity, but from what I know about him, that was a very Louis Dupont du Lac coded sentence, him being like, I like you because you're human. Okay, sure. The conversation culminates in Jesse wanting to be turned, and Lestat is like, absolutely not, babes. Absolutely not. I will not be doing that. And so then he just leaves. Does he just leave her at the Griffiths Observatory? I don't know, but he just leaves. It's time for the concert in Death Valley, which is actually not a concert in Death Valley. It was a concert in Melbourne, Australia, and they were able to bring in 5,000 goth extras to come and, you know, be in this concert scene. The scale of it is very, very impressive. Like, say what you will about this movie for its dropped plot points, out of character roles, all kind of weird pacing, but effects wise, it's not that bad. It's not that great, but it's not that bad. And this scene is kind of proof positive of that. It's a massive in scale. Like, it's made up like a real concert. They had 5,000 extras, which is a lot of extras. Like, that is a scene that is huge. And at this time in kind of film history, they could have very easily just CGI'd the crowd. Like, they could have just done that, but they were able to get 5,000 people to come out and film for these scenes at the concert, which is pretty cool. The ancients and the rest of the vampiric world are also at this concert because Lestat told him to, and he's just like, you know, come out wherever you are, like, you know, come to me, basically very come to me coded. Now he's also invited them to kill him, and I think it's just a remedy too, maybe of like, he's lonely, he wants to be taken out type of thing. I don't really know, but the ancients are there because they know that Akasha has been woken up, and if she's gonna show up anywhere, it's gonna be here. Jesse is also there, we know this. While they're playing, all of a sudden these vampires come and like attack Lestat on stage, and Marius comes up to help him. But what was funny during the fight scene, when Lestat is like fighting off the vampires who were trying to kill him, he does a corkscrew, and early 2000s movies loved to put a corkscrew in their fight choreography. I can only think of another example being the live action Scooby-Doo movie. Daphne's scene at the end where she's fighting the like luchador guy, she just does like a corkscrew move, and that's always been cemented in my mind. So every time I see it, I think I think of that scene from Scooby-Doo. You will never be Daphne Blake, played by Sarah Michelle Gellar. Lestat, you will never be her. But then who pops up out from underneath the stage? Queen Akasha. She has made her grand debut to everybody, and she like literally breaks the bottom of the stage and like comes up, like floats up beautifully, and then she takes Lestat and they like shoot into the sky, and she takes him away from the concert. And the concert, I would imagine, was over. Now I would be trying to figure out how I'm going to get my money back, because they played half of a song, the stage broke, these weird vampire things started shooting from the sky, and then a beautiful sexy vampire lady came out from the bottom of the stage and took away the lead singer. I'm getting my money back. I don't care. And I have in my notes, I put Akasha takes Lestat. It should have been me. And it should have been me. It should have. I'm just saying. So now we get, oh my God. So now we get to Akasha and Lestat talking for the first time in this movie that's basically almost over at this point. And she's just like, you know, I've basically kept you protected for all of these years. Like, she's like, you know what I like about you? I like your ego. I like that you thought it was you. Like that you thought it was you this whole time. So basically she just tells him like, you know, I want you to be my king as we take over the world. And Lestat's like, okay. And whatever you say, beautiful. And I would be saying the exact same thing. Yes, I would. And then we get the scene of all scenes, the hottest scene of all scenes. Oh my God. We get the scene that changed my life. This is their like one sex scene. It's not really a sex scene because you're not seeing anything. But when I tell you that this is still the hottest thing that I have ever seen in my life, I am serious. And the way that the Deftones made it into my Spotify playlist, a very particular playlist for a very particular time, if you know what I mean. The way that song is permanently the sexiest song I've ever heard. Oh my gosh. And it's due all in part to this scene. This scene changed lives. This scene changed lives. I probably can't show any of it, but like the scene changed lives. And for all of you anti-sex scene, you know, truthers out there, this is a sex scene that shows basically nothing, but yet is still so erotic and intimate, and it was just so well done. I'm getting flustered. Getting flustered just talking about it because it's just so hot. Oh my God. If anyone's available to recreate that, let me know. Then we get to the part of the movie where you really get to see how this movie has hit none of its narrative objectives at all. We get to Jessie, who has now, I guess, been taken by the ancients. She just shows up in the place from her dream when she was 6. And she shows up, and then who's there but Maharet? And Maharet is just like, you know, like, oh, like I found you. We're here together again. And if you're confused at this point as to what is going on and why this is happening, don't worry. The movie has done nothing to develop this. And basically Maharet was like, I had a baby before Akasha turned me. And so I tended to that baby and that baby's children and their children's children and whatever. This is a long lineage and you're in it. So like we're family. And so that gives some explanation of what Jessie's dream was and her connection, I guess, to the vampire world, because Maharet is of ancient, who is her aunt grandma. Like I said, the movie falls apart at this point. Really just pooches the landing. I'm sorry. What was so funny about this scene is that Maharet and Jessie are embracing, and then Maharet very dramatically like vanishes out of the scene. Like she just like vanishes out of frame in a way that's not really natural for anyone to like leave a frame, but it was so deliciously overly dramatic that I was like, okay, this is funny. But her just like leaving the frame in the way that she did was hilarious. We're basically in the home stretch of the movie, and we get to the last scene basically that Akasha and Lestat have, just them. And Lestat wakes up from a night of knocking boots with the Queen of the Damned. Lestat is looking out on the beach that is littered with corpses, and Akasha's like, hey, good morning. And so Lestat is just like, okay, hey. And Akasha's like, this is our kingdom. And Lestat says, a kingdom of corpses? Why? And Akasha says, why not? It has the energy of Barbie and Ken in the Barbie movie when she's like, to do what? Akasha has no idea why Lestat is like not happy and on board with killing all the humans. She's like, why not? Why not a kingdom of corpses? And she's just like, they believe in nothing and now they are nothing. They are nothing to us. They're our food. Duh. And so Lestat is just like, okay, like whatever, you're sexy, so I'll go with you. All of a sudden he's having this moral conundrum of not wanting to kill the humans, which feels a little bit like, all right, whatever, you guys have to be the good guy vampires because you don't want to kill any of the humans. The ancients are plotting Akasha's demise. They didn't want to see a beautiful black woman in a position of power, and so they clearly have to take her down. And I don't really like that. Included in this group of ancients is Armand, which if you've seen the Interview with the Vampire, even the movie or the show, there is no real continuity for what this character is supposed to look like. I think this version of the character is the most accurate to the book, because I think he's supposed to be like younger looking and have like lightly ginger hair, but it's just very funny for the people who at the time would have seen Interview with the Vampire, the movie, where Armand is played by Antonio Banderas, and then you get to this movie and you're like, oh, okay. I don't even think they say Armand's name, but like that's the credit. Like that is Armand. So they're all plotting and they're just like, we got to kill Akasha because she's far too powerful to stay alive at this point. And so when they're doing that, Jesse's like, well, what about Lestat? And Mahara's like, girl, forget him. He's Akasha's, so like I don't even know why you're thinking about him at this point in time. Also, we do have more pressing issues at hand, I think. And to me, with Jesse, I'm like, didn't he drop you when you guys got to the Griffith Observatory? Like, didn't he almost make you plummet to your death? Let him go. Let him go, babe. Y'all have not talked one-on-one that many times. You can't be this down bad. Like, I get it, but stand up, girl. While they're plotting and scheming, Lestat and Akasha, they show up because they're just like, all right, y'all got a problem with us. What's the situation? And what I was thinking was, did Akasha wake up from the dead with a full glam trunk with her? Like, she's had a costume change. She has had like a makeup, like everything. Like she's in full glam. Full glamourella. Like, who is her glam team traveling with her to give her these multiple looks? Like, where is she getting her clothes from? Sat and Akasha show up and they're just like, all y'all plotting against me. Like, Akasha's like, my children plotting against me. Typical. Jesse's dumb self has the audacity to ask, Lestat, what has she done to you? The look that Akasha gives Jesse, I howled because I was like, Jesse, do you think she's playing with you? No. She will kill you and think nothing of it. Jesse, you're not thinking, babe. You're kind of a dummy for real. Do you think Akasha is playing with you? No, girl, shut up. The last time you saw her, she came from underneath a stage and flew into the sky. Once again, these people see the brunt of Akasha's power and think, yeah, I can mess with her. Y'all are some dummies for real. But basically, Akasha is just like, listen, I know y'all are plotting and scheming against me, but I'm on a crusade to take over the world. So join me or die. And all the vampires in their moral whatever are just like, I will not stand with you. Like, we are going to fight against you for the good of vampires and humanity. So Akasha, the schemer, the plotter, the mastermind that she is, she looks to Lestat and she's just like, do you love me? And he's like, yeah. And she's like, if you love me, then you'll kill her, Jesse, because she's the only human here. She's food, whatever. Like, to prove Lestat, in order to prove his loyalty to her, has to kill someone that Akasha peeps may be important to him. And he's like, well, she's nothing to me. And she's like, okay, so good. So this should be easy. Kill her if you love me. Like, he thought she was going to say like, oh, she's nothing to you? Okay, well then don't worry about it. And so he goes and drains her blood and then assumingly killing her. Once she does that, the little line, I guess, on the big family tree that's in this room starts to bleed, meaning that I guess this bloodline has run out because Jesse is an orphan. So this bloodline is like ended. So all the little squares start to like drain blood. They do nothing to explain that. None whatsoever. This is the first time that there's any allusion to the fact that the blood little tree thing can move or drain blood or anything. None of that is mentioned. After he drains Jesse, he goes to Akasha and it's just like, now give me my crown, like basically make me your king. And so she offers her arm to him to drink from. And so she's just like, look at him, he's so obedient and everything. And I was like, oh, that is doing something for me personally. Lestat is drinking and drinking and drinking. You remember that pen, that little mystery mouse tool I told you about earlier? Now it's coming into play. So Lestat over drinks from her. Now also in this scene right before they walk in, Maharet just says, just to drop, I guess, more exposition in the third act, says, hey, if Akasha is like opening herself up to be like drank from, that makes her vulnerable, and so we can attack her at that point. Basically, like, we have to drain her in order for her to be weak enough for us to fight. And so by Lestat drinking a lot from her, that depletes some of her power. So all the vampires descend on Akasha. They drink from her and she's like flinging them off. Like 2 of them get flung off and like incinerated from the inside out. Like Akasha like sets them on fire because she just has that ability. And then the Armand of the group, also the same fate starts to happen to him, but then it reverses, meaning that like Akasha's power is depleting because they've all like drained enough of her blood and enough of her power. So then they all kind of get off of her and she's just like, you know, like, you've all betrayed me, F y'all, I'm out of here. She gives Lestat one final look as if to be like, you know, save me. And when I saw that look, I was like, oh, acting, mama. That's what Aaliyah was doing in that moment. And so she looks to Lestat and Lestat goes to her and drinks from her, assumingly to, you know, take himself into death with her in order to remove her evil from the world. And so he's drinking and drinking and drinking, and then Maharet like stops him. Now, mind you, Akasha is in this weird like Matrix pose the entire time. Like, she's like in a full back bend this entire time while they're doing this. And like Maharet and Lestat are having this discussion and you could just see like Akasha in the background like like she's just stuck. She chooses to be the noble woman and she drinks the last drops of Akasha, assumingly taking herself into death with Akasha. And it's at this point that you realize this movie has done practically nothing to set up what this whole situation means, because they have Armand be like, she drank all of Akasha and went into death with her. Like they have him explain it, and then they have Marius come in and be like, no, she's not dead, she's just sleeping. If she was dead, what difference really would it have made? Let's be honest here, what difference would it have made? None. No difference. Lestat goes over to Jesse, offers his blood to her, so now Jesse is assumingly been turned into a vampire. Final scene, we see Jesse and Lestat go to the Telemaska and return Lestat's journal back to David. And David's just like, oh, you're a vampire now, like, and, you know, what's it like? And Jesse's like, oh, like, you know, we could show you. And David's like, oh, no, thank you. And so for whatever reason, Marius was like hanging out outside of the Telemaska place as well. And so he goes in there to David, assumingly to turn him as well. And the last scene we see is Lestat and Jesse now taking on the world together. They're no longer lonely anymore because Lestat was lonely because he was abandoned by Marius, and Jesse's an orphan, so I guess they share that in common, but the movie did practically nothing to develop that relationship. And the scene ends with them emulating Madonna's Ray of Light music video. That's not canon, but that is exactly what it looked like to me. And the movie's over. Is this movie good? No. The movie is bad, even. But in watching it again, it is a movie that I can rewatch because of how, like, so bad it's good it is. Like, it really does horseshoe theory its way back to being, like, watchable, because it is just so bad, and so bad it's comical at points. But really and truly, if you're ever going to rewatch this movie, it is for the 10 minutes that we get of Aaliyah's performance. Like, she's so good as Akasha that it makes mourning her even more painful, because you're like, the the potential. Like, she is such a star, and you can't see much more of it. Like, we don't get much more Akasha. This was her last movie. It was released like after her death. You really think about like, wow, what would have been? You know, what could this movie have been if they had way more Akasha, maybe had a bigger budget, maybe were willing to give it a little bit more time, screenwriting wise, like all of the things that kind of contributed to the movie being a little bit of a mess. Like, what would it have been if they were able to actually give it a real, you know, the old heave-ho? I don't know. This movie could be worse. It could be worse. Now, one final fun fact is that during the in-credit sequence, this is when you can hear David Draymond's version of Forsaken, which is on the soundtrack. And also, there was supposed to be an in-credit song with Aaliyah singing a song written and assumingly composed by Jonathan Davis and Richard Gibbs. And it never came to fruition. At a halfway rap party that they had in Melbourne, Aaliyah went up to Richard Gibbs and was just like, you know, I'm a really big fan of the songs that you made for the movie. And he says that he was kind of like shocked that, number one, she kind of like, you know, knew who he was and everything. And she's like, no, like, I'm a really big fan of Korn, you know, and in talking with him. And she's just like, I would love talking about them. She was like, I'd love for y'all to write a song for me. And so that never came to pass. Like, it was supposed to happen and then it didn't, because Aaliyah passed away before they could get any of that done. She also passed away before they could do ADR on the film. So principal photography had ended, so shooting essentially was done. But now that they were in the post-production stage of the film, what tends to happen on a lot of films is that once you're done shooting, you get all the footage, you're starting to edit. There are certain parts where, you know, a line of dialogue may be getting a little bit muddled or muffled, or you just maybe a little bit quiet in the mix. And so what they do is they begin a process called ADR, which is where you basically have the actors go in and redub certain lines. Now, on bigger productions, it tends to be the actual actors themselves coming in to do ADR. On smaller productions, it tends to be just career voice actors coming in and, to the best of their ability, impersonating the actors in order to kind of fill in those little small gaps that they may need ADR wise. But for this movie, because Aaliyah had passed away, they actually had her brother Rashad come in, because they kind of had a similar placement as far as like voice could go, and they could do some editing, manipulating, and things like that in post. But they had him come in and do ADR for her. So that's why you can tell that there's kind of the sound that's been placed onto her voice for all of her lines, where it kind of feels like it's on these multiple levels, essentially, is because they had her brother come in and do ADR for her. And so there's kind of this layering effect that happens. Sometimes it's a bit distracting, but sometimes I think for the fact that there was no real way to get around it, it was really cool. I think it contributes to the way that Akasha is this like 1,000-year-old mother of all vampires. She kind of contains a lot of these essences in her, and like we see it in her scene where she perishes, so like all these different like little spirits whirring around. It's like she contains the voices of thousands of the vampiric children that she's made. There's a way to explain it in universe, but I just think it's pretty cool. If you've made it to the end of this recap review, thank you so much for watching. I hope you really enjoyed at least this video. If you didn't enjoy the movie, don't forget to like and subscribe and do all that fun stuff. And in the comments below, let me know what you thought about this movie. Do you love it? Do you hate it? Are you kind of just in between like me? Do you hate it so much that you kind of end up loving it? Whatever it is, let me know in the comments down below. And also let me know what else you'd like to see me recap or react to next. As always, I'm Bobby. This is Culture Kitsch. I do not have an outro yet, but I will see you next week.